Wow, okay, so it seems that today a lot of things have kind of blown up in the world of financials for the Idaho 4, specifically whether Kaylee had 100 grand in her account or not. And it has been alleged, but no one has ever actually said she had 100 grand in her account. It was a rumor. Not sure where it got started. Some are saying Reddit. I had heard it before Reddit, but I will say this. Is it possible for a college kid to have 100 grand in accounts? Yes, it is. If you include investment accounts, like retirement accounts started as a child, which Steve said they started one for as a child. If a college student is playing the stock market, is doing any sort of online sports betting, is investing in crypto, it's possible. Like I know a college kid that did sports betting that earned 50,000 in 1 year. So it is possible to do investments and get yourself to 100 grand as a college student. But it's the anomaly. But with that said, it's none of our business how much money any of them had in their accounts. Now, I hear I was summoned last night by Miss Potts, wondering if I know where their money went. And because the parents apparently haven't said anything about their children's accounts, other than, yes, we know Steve has, but I wanted to start with this soundbite first.
I'm not sure how all of their bank accounts are going to prove Brian Koberger allegedly stalked them and killed them.
There's nothing that says their accounts are going to prove that, but this is an investigation, okay? Whenever there's a homicide in the early stages of the investigation, when they're looking for suspects, looking for motive, they check everything. That includes financial records. So this was in the early stages before Koberger was even a suspect. And it can turn out that those financial records have nothing to do with why they were murdered or who murdered them. But they can't leave any stone unturned. So when I hear people say, oh, they didn't do a thorough investigation, or they didn't check this, they didn't check that, this is proof they did a thorough investigation. Because finances are one of the things you always check into when somebody's murdered. It's standard. Ask any detective. This is one of the first things they look into. And you can look at the warrant dates and you'll see it was within the first couple weeks of the investigation. So nothing to say that it had anything to do with Koberger at that time, because he wasn't on their radar yet. But this is just protocol. Now, you asked me where their money went. That if I know where their money went, let's listen to this.
As far as I know, none of these families have talked about getting any of their kids' money back that were in their accounts, right? Steve is claiming that Kaylee had a lot of money, from what I understand, allegedly, right? So where's all the money? What happened to all of the kids' money that was in their bank accounts if it didn't go to their families? Anyone? Anyone know? Maybe Viv, you're listening. You know everything. Where did all their money go?
Let me introduce you to probate. When someone passes away, things usually go to probate court. Now, because none of them had dependents, they were all single, so no spouses. If they didn't have a will, then they are called intestate. And that goes in Idaho to the Universal Probate Code. And that means that their parents will get their assets. But it has to go through probate first. Now, there are some things that don't have to go through probate. Examples would be property in a living trust, life insurance policies, 401ks, IRAs, or other retirement accounts, securities and transfer on death accounts, pay on death bank accounts, and joint tenancy real property. Now, Idaho does offer a simplified probate process for smaller estates, so we're assuming all of them have assets that are less than $100,000. So you might not need to go through the full probate phase. So for anything that needs to go through probate, these are the steps. First, the family must initiate the probate proceeding. And the probate court will assign an executor, and that is the person that will be over all of the assets of the deceased person and working with the probate court. Next would be acceptance of the application and issuance of letters. Those are formal letters that allow the executor to have control over the assets during probate. 3 is notice to heirs and devisees. That is formal letters that must go out to anyone that will be the recipient of the assets. So in this case, their parents are the heirs. So formal letters would go out to the parents about the probate process. Next is notice to creditors. You must publish in the local newspaper for 3 consecutive weeks a notice to the creditors, known and unknown, so that they can make any claim against the estate. Any creditor that hasn't come forward after 4 months then does not have a claim, and that process is done. Number 5, inventory of the estate. The executor must provide the court with a full inventory of all assets of the deceased. Step 6 is distribution of assets. Now, that cannot happen until 4 months after the notice to creditors, because remember, creditors have 4 months to come forward. Then after the 4 months, the executor can start paying off any debt that the decedent had. So any bills they still had outstanding, loans that weren't forgiven. Now, student loans, there is an application process to get the student loan forgiven if the person dies before the loan is paid. So the student loan wouldn't be a worry, but any other, her car loan would have come out of her assets unless her parents went ahead and paid it out of her own money, which it sounds like they may have. But those are the sorts of things that will come out of the assets. And then anything that's still left gets distributed to the parents, because she did not have a spouse or children. None of them had a spouse or children. Now, the legal fees for the probate court also come out of their assets. And 7 is the informal verification statement of the personal representative closing the estate. So they will just issue to the court an informal statement stating that all of the assets have been dispersed and that the probate process can be closed. Now, this process can take anywhere from a couple months to over a year. It just depends on what type of accounts there were, how many assets. It sounds like in these kids' cases, it shouldn't have taken very long, but it also depends on when the family started the probate process. If they waited a while, then of course it'll extend, out further. Now, 401ks, retirement accounts, are not given to the heirs in cash. Those go into another retirement account. So they have to be rolled into another one. So anything that Kaylee had in that IRA that they started for her gets rolled into an IRA of her parents. So I don't believe there was probably a lot of cash that any of the families got from their estates. Also, you say that, well, you haven't heard them saying about what happened to the money. Honestly, why would any of them talk about it? It's nobody's business where their children's money went. And I think one way we do know that the money wasn't frozen is that Steve G hasn't said anything, because I guarantee you if any of Kaylee's assets had been frozen, Steve would have been like a squeaky wheel. He would have said something. So the fact that he hasn't said anything about them not getting any of the kids' assets tells me that the process has already been done and they received anything that was left in their children's accounts. Now, let's take a look at the financial warrants that were served, because there's another assumption that you made that doesn't add up with the dates. So let's listen to the soundbite.
If everything that they were doing was above board and their bank accounts all contained legally earned income, I don't see why, you would need a Department of Labor warrant. Do you get what I'm saying? To prove that. You'd be able to see that just through the deposits in the accounts where they're coming from. You're looking at the dates of the bank warrants and things like that, and then the Department of Labor warrant. It would appear that something in the bank accounts tipped them off to we need to look into what they were doing for work. Because where did they get all the money? That's my speculation. My speculation is they're looking at these accounts, seeing all this money for these like part-time baristas or kids with barely, any employment, and they're wondering where all the money came from. And when you kind of see how everything went, the order that it went in, it would appear the bank accounts are what triggered the Department of Labor.
Actually, no, the bank accounts did not trigger the Department of Labor warrant. Here's when all the financial warrants went out. Starting November 19th, then November 21st, then November 28th. Now that 1222 was Elon for Kaylee, which is believed to be the car loan. But Elon also does like debit and credit cards for certain credit unions as well. So it could have also just been her Tide debit card. The Department of Labor warrant went out on the 29th. He actually got it issued on the 28th and then sent it on the 29th. So I completely disagree with your speculation that the Idaho Department of Labor warrant was triggered by their bank accounts, because it went out before any of their bank account information came back. It went out in that same time frame that they were just issuing all financial warrants, and there is nothing that says anything was triggering that. That is a normal process to just determine who employers are. You're doing interviews in the first couple days, and you're probably asking friends and family, etc. Okay, where did they work? Do you know if they were having any problems at work? They can get that Department of Labor warrant to find out who they were employed by, and then they can go and talk to the employers. Then they know exactly for sure who the employers are, and they can go in and say, hey, was there anybody in here giving them a problem? Were they having any problems at work? Strange people hanging around, etc. The other thing the Department of Labor is known to get warrants for, like that law enforcement will get warrants for through the Department of Labor, is complaints. So that is also where you would find out if any of them had issued a discrimination complaint against an employer or a wage complaint, because that could also go, like in the early stages of investigation, towards motive. Did they have a problem with their employer? Was there a complaint on file? But normally when you do a warrant for the State Department of Labor, it's to find out who they were employed by. If you are just getting that from interviews from friends and family and don't know for sure, it's better to get it in black and white. So I disagree that there was anything shady going on with their accounts. And also you can see this warrant for the Department of Labor wasn't issued after any of the bank accounts came back. Now, I put on there that they did issue it in 9 names, but only 7 came back. But I think, personally, that part of that warrant was actually the wrong part, because remember it said that he amended the warrant, and I think Mowry accidentally sent them the information that you would send a bank, because if we take a look at this Department of Labor warrant, you'll see. Okay, you can see here is where he said he amended it. And if you look here, there were 7 names that were sent back. And I believe those 7, I think it's obviously the 4 deceased, and then I believe it's Dylan and Bethany, and then Ashlyn Couch, because she was the other person on the lease in that house, even though she wasn't living there. And if you look at this, it matches exactly the warrants that he sent the banks. It is asking for things that the Department of Labor would not have at all. It is talking about signature cards. It is talking about safe deposit boxes, deposits, teller transactions. Like, this is not a warrant you would send the Department of Labor. This is what you would send a bank. So I believe that's what Mowry sent first in error, and then had to remove and resend a new warrant. Because those extra bullet points are what appeared on a lot of the bank warrants. They sent out warrants with 9 names on them, and a lot of that is because there was probably co-signers, especially on like the credit cards. Like Steve saying that Kaylee had the American Express card that they co-signed on. The parents' names would be those other bullets that appeared, because anybody that was a co-signer on a credit card or one of those bank accounts would have to be on that. I believe he sent a bank warrant in error and then had to amend it. So I don't believe there was 9 names being searched for with the Department of Labor. There were only 7, and it would make sense that it's the 4 victims and then the other 3 people that were on the lease. And as far as the financial warrants go, I know that some of you don't believe this, and that's fine, but I've talked to a few people in law enforcement that have said they will go ahead and issue a blanket warrant rather than taking the time to really parse during the early stages of the investigation who has what bank account immediately. So if they saw that some of them had an account with Numerica, they're going to send the warrant for everybody in that house. So all the victims and the other people on the lease. So that's why their names appear on all of those warrants. It was easier to just send them out with everybody's names on there at the start. And then if you needed to parse something later, you could, like how you saw they sent out one later just for Elon for Kaylee. But it was just easier that if you're seeing signs in the house of a debit card from one bank or a checking account from another bank, you send out a blanket warrant to that bank with everybody's names that you're inquiring about. And if it comes back saying they don't have an account, then you know. If it comes back saying they have an account, you check the financials on them. So that's just, it's killing 2 birds with 1 stone, to use a phrase. But this is pretty much all I want to discuss on this financial issue, because I think it leads to nowhere. I don't think their finances had anything to do with the case. It was just good investigative work, as you would do with any homicide investigation, to pull their finances. I don't believe the kids had anything nefarious going on. It sounds like Kaylee only had a few accounts, actually. Now, could some of them have shared all those accounts? It's possible. You know, banks do come to college campuses and offer free things for opening accounts. So you deposit $25 and they may put $50 in, or you may get a free hoodie or a free subscription to an online magazine or things like that. So it's possible they signed up for all those accounts together to get incentives. When I was in college, the credit card companies were allowed to come on campus and offer you incentives. So some of us took out credit cards we didn't need. But I think it's more the former than the latter. I think law enforcement just put out blanket warrants because it was so early in the investigation and they wanted to knock out all of those financials right away. So like I say, I know some of you aren't going to agree, and that's fine. I just share my knowledge and what I've found out through experience and from talking to people in law and in law enforcement. And as usual, if there's anything you'd like me to cover, let me know.